Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals, everybody. Um, Sorry for the late start. Mahon and I just actually
It
discovered
was
that.
my fault, unfortunately.
Well, we actually kind of just discovered. I didn't even know this, but when we had set the time here in Connecticut, and Mahon's in Dublin, and we had just had our spring forward time, so we went forward an hour a week ago, and Mahan and I had already planned out the time a few weeks prior, so we didn't take into account that Ireland apparently hasn't. Is that the whole of the UK, or is it?
Yeah, the whole UK won't have done it until the end of this month. So
Yeah,
yeah, there's a time lag.
yeah,
It
that's
seems
pretty. That's pretty
forever.
funny.
Hmm.
Things get so weird when you start messing with time and stuff like that. It's like it's so hard to have any kind of communication or anything like that. But anyway, um, got people. This is Mahon McCann, and I've been listening to Mahon for a couple months now. I'll let him introduce himself, and uh, but yeah, what's up, Mahon?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Nick. It's really cool to be here. Yeah, so I'm a philosopher by training, BAs in philosophy. Currently doing a PhD in philosophy in Dublin City University, studying ethics and new technologies. So I specialize in the ethics of social media and the ethics of the attention economy. But I do mainly through a virtue ethics perspective, which is where the kind of Platonism stuff comes in. And then outside of that, yeah, I do a lot of online philosophy stuff. That's where I do my podcast. I have a Substack, the Wisdom Dojo Substack. Really trying to help people through the meaning crisis is the main focus of it, really through philosophy, through psychology, through a lot of the stuff that helped me personally to get, a more stable worldview. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit more as we kind of go into it. But yeah, really sharing those philosophical tools and philosophical ideas for people to get some philosophical grounding in like the crazy modernity situation that we're in, which we talked about a little bit before. Like people are coming out of legacy religions, some people are spiritual but non-religious, some people are struggling with all the different kind of ideas floating around and scientific materialism. And so yeah, I just try and do some sense making on that and connect with like really good thinkers from academia, from the internet, and yeah, try and do it in a way that's digestible to people, because sometimes ontology and epistemology and all these things can be slightly terrifying. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah, in a nutshell, that's pretty much what I do, and what I'm interested in.
So, what, like, as a younger person, did you see yourself kind of coming into that kind of a profession, if you will, or like, let's talk about, like, 13-year-old Mahan. Like, were you even aware? What was your yeah? Were you even aware of like things like philosophy or some legacy religions or anything like that? When did it become like?
Yeah, I think I was a very weird case study, to be honest, in terms of, because my parents raised me without religion. So I was raised as an atheist, technically speaking. Like they were both Catholic, as most Irish people are, and then fell out of religion really in the 90s, and decided to raise us without any religion at all, to decide to kind of figure it out for ourselves. So religion was, I suppose I had tons of philosophical questions because I didn't have a religion. You know what I mean? I kind of had to do philosophy in a sense of like, I remember when I was younger, like you hear about people dying and you're like, well, what happens after you die? And your parents are like, well, nothing. And you're like, well, okay, well, what's nothing? How does that make any sense? Like, how do you, wrap your head around it? So like, I kind of had to, I think I was confronted with a lot of philosophical problems just because of that atheism. So I was definitely thinking about it. When I was 13, I was definitely getting into a lot of trouble. I was quite a bold youngster in Dublin, getting in trouble with my stupid friends, doing stupid stuff. So that was a definitely challenging growing up. But I think I turned to philosophy, particularly in university, to try and answer those big questions because they were so present for me in a way. Maybe for other people, they were kind of abstract, but I really felt like I had existential problems in my life that I needed
Yeah,
to address, like,
yeah,
and the way to do that was going to be philosophy for me, because I didn't trust religions in any sense. So yeah,
yeah.
philosophy was the way to do it.
Yeah, for me, I think I think I would have put myself in a similar trajectory as yourself, where I grew up. having a pretty decent exposure to a lot of different 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 modes of Christianity, if you will. Um,
Mhm.
as a young adolescent, I was a really, really big soccer player or a football player. Um, so I was able to play Division 1 soccer. Like just my whole youth was sort of consumed with sports, really, just
Mhm.
football in general. And I I definitely had a disposition towards taking things in a significant or a meaningful way. If I had like, I can remember as a kid, kind of playing or replaying in my mind how particular games had went or particular confrontations had gone with other players or with other classmates or anything like that, and then
Mhm.
kind of using that imaginal space to sort of anticipate how a big game might go or things like that. So I definitely had a sense for things being very meaningful. I didn't do things sort of haphazardly. I was kind of at least thought that I was doing things deliberately. And by the time that I got to um, go to university, I knew I wanted to do something in that realm. I just didn't know it was called philosophy. So once I took a philosophy 101 class and we we read Euthyphro for the first time. Youth, I was like, this is awesome. Uh, so I majored in philosophy at university, and then I don't know if this was because of the sort of philosophical education I got, or what the deal was. Maybe just me temperamentally, I
Mhm.
couldn't really take the academic setting. Just being so used to being an athletically minded person. My dad's a really blue collar worker. Um, I did like blue collar jobs in my summers home from school, and I just found um, during those summers that I felt more like in the earth, more in the ground. And then definitely when I was playing sports, it was just so physically demanding that um, it when I was in university, the philosophical education I got definitely felt uh, a little too, let's just say, pompous for me. And
Yeah, that's fair enough, man. That seems to happen a lot with university philosophy as well. I kind of in my undergraduate, I felt a similar way in a sense, that it can become almost something that is so detached from reality that it's not even like worth doing. For me, like I really fell into, I don't know if you've ever heard of Philosophy as a Way of Life by Pierre Hadot. This
yep,
kind of thinking of ancient philosophy, that it wasn't just about like abstract arguments; it was about like how you live and your character and virtues. And like a lot of ancient philosophers were like, similarly, they were athletes, they were warriors, they were wrestlers, they were statesmen, they were family, like they had real experience in life. They weren't just like sitting in an ivory tower kind of thing.
yeah.
So it was really that aspect of philosophy that motivated me. But I totally see where you're coming from. Of like, academic philosophy can get very, it's actually just not that practical for real life.
Yeah, so I went through in the track that I was on. I I went through all of the what would be considered ancient, then modern. Starting with Descartes and kind of ending with Kant. And I remember taking a seminar in Kant, and I really where we just focused on the critique of the critique of pure reason, and I really loved the seminar. Like it was amazing. Um, but at the same time, I was also going through things in my life that were just like, this is really, these two are not connecting. But I do very specifically remember early on having this love for Plato and feeling like, just kind of looking at art or like sort of sculptures of what Plato might have been like. What felt really connecting to me to him was this notion of him being like a thick or a wrestling sort of person. And for me, like even to this day, like now that I'm, it's years beyond that, I'll still have moments in my day where if I'm in a particular headspace where I'll, turn a corner and, imagine myself like kind of confronting Plato, him being there, and having the opportunity to actually like really physically contend with him. And I know that from a Christian perspective, like I got into um, uh, I guess you would call it like a more fundamentalist Christian paradigm uh, in between this space where I really got to study the Bible and look through a lot of different Christian Christian ways of expression and stuff like that. And I know that a lot of people, a lot of Christians have this spiritual exercise, if you will, with Christ, where they'll be able to kind of have some sort of imaginal experiences with that person in some way. So it's been a really really good journey for me. I just didn't really understand back then that having that kind of formalized experience with philosophy or an act that it would kind of like at least plant the seeds or at least give you the exposure to even reading a dialogue. So like Pierre Hadot's, it was really not until I kind of came across John Vervaeke's work where he kind of, I feel like he kind of gave me permission to really fall in love with Plato. And then reading DC Schindler, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like
Ah,
I've you know
outstanding. Like so powerful. Yeah, I've had 3 conversations with DC now actually, which have all been like really brilliant. I had a similar experience with Plato in terms of as an undergraduate, like I just didn't. I mean, I read Platonic dialogues, but they didn't really strike me, and they weren't like that interesting or anything. And then obviously I went off. I did creative writing, so I would write a lot of fiction. I was writing a lot of stories, writing plays. I had plays performed in Dublin, and I kind of turned away from philosophy and went the more dramatic side of things, like towards mythology and stories, because it felt like there was more like wisdom in that in some sense than a lot of the like academic philosophy. And then it was coming back to Plato, I realized he could fuse those together in a sense, almost more like the biblical writings, where it's like there's a mixture of story and philosophy together. Like him writing in dialogues isn't a mistake in a sense. His drama, the perfection of drama, is philosophy for Plato. So
yeah
he ties those together in a way that when you can plug into that, I think it's just like the levels of meaning are so much more powerful than what you'll get in just a treatise of philosophy. Like even the symbolism of like the Republic, the first line of like Socrates goes down to the Piraeus, like obviously because he goes down because the Piraeus is below Athens, but also it's like the philosopher going down into the cave, and he is in this world of appearances, and he's meeting the sophists that don't believe in truth or reality. And it's like there's this dramatic quality and literary quality to it that just like when you can plug into that, you're like, whoa, okay, there's
yeah
really deep stuff going on here that I missed on the first reading,
yeah
and that's why I think
exactly.
Plato's so special. Like, yeah,
Yeah, I'm gonna try and do the best I can for the remainder of this conversation to try not to talk about every single thing, that's like in my mind that I want to talk about with you, because just
let
all
it
of the
go, man.
reference.
We have time anyway. I mean, if people are happy listening, yeah, I got
I
no
think,
plans.
yeah, with that notion of fusing that the coherent the coherence of the narrative order of things. I think John Vervaeke does a good job of uh, delineating 3 orders of that need to be kind of in place to sort of have a coherent ontology. Being the normative order, nomological order, and narrative order. And I think what you get in a Platonic dialogue, and this is something that I've been trying to, gently kind of push towards, or at least offer or present to, fundamentalist Christians, is that, when they grow up kind of having those biblical stories and having that biblical training, they kind of see the world. It like kind of provides the the landscape or the salience landscape for them in a lot of different ways. But what I see is that without the Platonic dialogues, without having an understanding, or not even an understanding, just kind of like merely participating with them, you miss out on so much stuff, including the nomological order. Because I mean, even implicit in the dialogues, like when what I see is like when Plato wants to go for like a killer blow, or at least kind of like establish something as sort of more of an objective or a an absolute, he'll
Mhm.
make the move towards geometry, because there's axioms and there's clear definitions of things, and so he'll move into a mathematical nomological sort of um, space in nested inside of this drama, of this narrative, with characters and emotions and motivations and different things like that. And then it seems like him being able to fuse those things in his philosophy allows for the emergence of a normative order of things. And that normative order, in at least in my estimation, is kind of like the bedrock or the fertile ground for something like Christianity to kind of come into. So Christians kind of inherit this normative order
Totally.
that Plato kind of, you know, set the stage for, at least.
Yeah, I think they're talking about the same thing a lot of the time. I mean, at Plato, like the church fathers, a lot of early church fathers were very Platonist, like Origen or Augustine. Like they were all Platonic or Neoplatonic philosophers. It was kind of the worldview of the time that they were in, and so it's hard. It was hard not to be. And also, I mean, for me, because he mentioned like the nomological order, the narrative order, the kind of which is in Vervaeke's language is a worldview, and he describes the meaning crisis as having the loss of those three orders, the loss of a coherent worldview, the loss of a purpose or a narrative, and then the loss of a hierarchy of kind of a normative development that you can follow, basically, that you know how you're getting better and how you're getting worse. And I think by going back to Plato, you can see them really clearly. Like he really has an ordered universe in a sense, or a moral universe that was the founding vision. And I mean, Plato synthesized a lot of like Parmenides and Heraclitus and Pythagoras. He didn't just pull it out of nowhere. But yeah, just somebody said in the comment section, Gregory of Nyssa. I mean, it's unbelievable. And so I think, yeah, Plato is he's the opposite of the modern like scientific materialist, nominalist, reductionist kind of nightmare that a lot of people, for myself particularly in the meaning crisis, is like has made it very hard for people to engage with religion or spirituality again, which is necessary for the transcendence in the worldview of like, if the world is just this flat ontology of like just a world of objects and we're an object and there's no transcendence, there's no invisible, there's no constraints in that sense, then there's no meaning either. Like it is connected in a sense. And I think Plato offers a way back into that. When you understand the Platonic worldview, it's very, I mean, you'll see the connections with Christianity immediately. I was actually reading book 2 of the Republic today. I don't know if you read where he talks about the perfect injustice happening to the most just person, and he's describing it as like the worst injustice would happen to the most innocent person who's the most just person, and he's describing that they'd be tortured, they'd be humiliated, and then finally they'd be crucified, and that this would be the biggest injustice. And I was like, he might as well be talking about Christ in like,
Yeah.
400 years before it. Like, it's unbelievable how he anticipates really. Obviously I
Yes.
think Christianity perfects what Plato's like. Plato isn't the finished product, but there's certainly the footsteps of Christianity already in Plato,
Yeah. I can't remember
which is
which
super
dialogue
cool.
it is. It might be the Theaetetus, or I'm really not sure, but you can see
Mhm.
in a lot of the dialogues how there's these prefigures of Christ, where I think Socrates actually is
I'd say
Um,
Socrates himself is a kind of
y-
prefiguring of. I mean,
yeah,
he's a martyr in a sense,
yeah. I mean, even
for the
at all
truth.
of the orders we're talking about, in a narrative sense, I mean, he goes through and gets accused by his own people and gets condemned to death. There's that
Yeah.
narrative order is there, in terms of the uh, the normative order of things. It's the same thing. He's kind of like got this poor. He's not very wealthy. He's very much disliked by a lot of the aristocracy, if you will, just like Jesus. So even the steps of the trajectory of his narrative, or his narrative sequence, you see so many parallels. And I again, I can't remember which dialogue it was, but he was basically asking his interlocutor to delineate for him the perfect person, or something like that. It was
Mhm.
something revolving around that, and it was definitely kind of like pointing the person towards Christ. When John Vervaeke did his After Socrates series, I remember him having a talk with Christopher Mas, one of the dialogues with Christopher Mastropietro. They had come out with this like bombshell of a statement where I think Chris said something to the effect of, "We're trying to use the eyes of Socrates to find Christ," something like that.
Yeah, Chris would drop a bomb like that. He's good
Yeah,
for those, yeah, genius lines.
yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, something that led me. I mean, I'm getting baptized as a Catholic this Easter, which is an interesting, maybe. Like I'd obviously was raised as an atheist and was really opposed to Christianity in a sense, and through Platonism and understanding the Platonic worldview, I was like, oh my God, this is, the metaphysics of Christianity. I was really wrong. I mean, what Plato talks about as the good, DC Schindler argues, the good is what Christians call God. Like it's the same thing. And so, the way Plato argues for it is very philosophical, I suppose, in a sense, and can provide a philosophical art. I mean, for Plato, the good, I don't know if you've read in the Republic, the good comes up in book 5 and book 6. um, it's the basis of all truth and knowledge in a sense. It underlies, it's the connection between logos and ontos, between intelligibility and reality, which is that there's an order to the cosmos that our minds are capable of grasping, and so that underlies all rational argumentation. But you can't give a rational argument for it because it would be circular. So it's like you can't you can't argue against it, because if it's false, it's still true. Like you end up in this weird kind of circular thing of like, and that's why Plato says, I mean, his whole argument for education was it's turning one's soul to the good. That was his, like, that's the journey out of the cave, up the levels of the divided line. And that you don't like, it's like the beatific vision. It's like you're not meant to go and grasp the whole of God and say, "Oh, I've figured this out. This is great." You're meant to behold the good. It's an experience in a sense, an insight maybe, and that, I mean, for me was so. It was intellectually reassuring in a sense of just like there's this bedrock to all intellectual stuff that almost takes you beyond just these arguments and argumentation that's more spiritual in a sense. I think Christianity really brings that down into the practices, into the communion, into the ways of reading and participating with people to try and get to that vision or get to that revelation or that insight. Like, so yeah, I mean, yeah, I think if you want to get more deeply into Christianity, getting more deeply into Platonism is gonna illuminate a lot of stuff, especially in this very rational time we're in. I think the like scientific mindedness of people, we need this kind of more so probably than ancient people. We're a bit more skeptical or suspicious
yeah,
these
yeah.
things.
I just kind of had this thought while you were talking that I haven't really had before, but it seems like one of the things that Christianity is lacking now, is that really, really, really strong notion of reason. And um, like, so I guess in a narrative sense, what I'm trying to say is that what Christianity doesn't have is a Socrates. It doesn't have somebody who can be a stand-in for the good and defend truth through the mode of reason. So we kind of talked about this in our group session last night. um, I kind of introduced to the group how DC Schindler's notion of how the truth is sort of defenseless. However, because we have this very I have this very strange relationship to the notion of truth, and the degree to which I can like fracture that framing and try and make it into a more malleable and like flowing understanding of what truth is. It
Hmm.
is definitely proportional to the degree to which I can uh think Socratically. you know when you were saying when you were kind of talking about DC Schindler's kind of really his book there, um which I would love to try and pick his brain, but he's coming out a little bit more and more on the internet and stuff like that. So it's really nice to be able to listen to him speak, and involve himself in dialogues. Like all the videos you've done with him are really really awesome. But back to what I was going to try and like kind of tease out of you a little bit is
Hmm.
the the notion of the truth being defenseless, um, and having the notion of truth in the way that I think a lot of people understand it, is that there's really a subjective truth and then there's an objective truth. And what we kind of were able to sort of tease out last night in our group was, um, I think, something to the effect of what DC Schindler is saying, which is, um, the good, what it's going to afford this this division, or this notion of this harsh divide between an objective and a subjective truth, is it's not going to make the two of them incompatible or
Hmm.
rivalrous. What it's actually going to do is it's going to make them both intelligible and bind them together, not not in a symmetrical way, but in a proportionalized way, which is to say, in a reasonable way, where you if you dive too far into the absoluteness of truth as a relative thing, it just starts to morph into, well, an objective truth. And what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean I actually had did a podcast last night with I don't know if you've ever seen Footnotes to Plato,
Yeah,
Matthew
I've been
David
watching
Siegel.
Matt Segal for like years, man. So you did a
Yeah,
second
Matt's
conversation with
the
him?
second conversation with him. Yeah, literally on the
Cool.
nature of truth, like on this topic, because I think you're 100% correct that there's an emerging notion of truth that's probably more like the ancient version of truth, really. That's like Heidegger's truth as aletheia, or disclosure, which is like an unconcealing of reality in a sense. I think DC Schindler, he has this kind of dramatic notion of truth, that truth is more like the insight a character would get as they progress through a story, as they kind of develop. It's like truth by transformation. Whereas scientific truth is like you have a method that you apply and you subtract the individual as much as possible, in a sense. It's like a cookie cutter kind of industrial thing that you can put through and you sift out truth at the end. This is very different. This is more like an insight that you get from undertaking a journey, essentially, as you learn what things are real and what things are not real, and you can discern better to see like more clearly into reality. Um, Plato has what's called a virtue epistemology, which is that your character essentially reveals reality to you. If you think about Plato, it's like he has this tripartite division between lovers of wisdom, lovers of honor, and lovers of pleasure. And
Hmm.
so only the lover of wisdom will actually go on the journey to see the truth. The other ones are just happy with like pleasure or with honor or whatever it is. And that's where reason comes in as well. That I mean, DC Schindler argues that reason requires love, in a sense. Like it has to. It's not just cold calculation. You have to really care about what's true and what's real in order to go after it, in a sense. And that's where real knowledge comes from, which is real knowledge of reality. I mean, somebody mentioned Saint Gregor of Nyssa in the chat there, and Saint Gregor of Nyssa's definition of truth is not having misapprehensions about being. So essentially, not thinking that non-being is being. So it's
Yeah.
like just knowing what's real, in a sense. But that, yeah, this participatory, that's what Matt describes it as, a participatory notion of truth, or truth as participation, which involves a kind of risk, a journey, a pursuit. Like it's like hard won wisdom and insight that you can't really just have a method for that just like pukes out facts. Truth isn't just facts. It's not just information. It's something much more than that. And
Yeah.
also, I mean, in Christianity, truth's a man. He's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
way, the truth, and the life. I mean, I think that's not a mistake. That's because the pattern that Christ undertakes, of his life, is the path to truth. Similarly to Socrates, it's this uphill struggle in the face of, probably a lot of the other forces, social forces, our own tendencies towards laziness and pleasure and
Yeah. Or deception.
foolishness, to
Yeah.
self-deception. And in that, yeah, and that's like for Plato, I think it's like degrees of truth. Like if you think of the character leaving the cave, in the cave, they're in the world of appearances, they're completely deluded. And then when they start going a little bit out of the cave, like you see a little bit more. Like when you see the fire, you realize
Yep.
the shadows are created by the
Yep.
fire. That's a real insight into reality. And then you can go a little bit further than that. You're blinded by the light, you recover until you get this vision of the good at the end. But like the good's in the cave as well. It's like there's truth all the
Yes.
way down. It's like
Yeah.
every bit along the journey is progress along degrees of truth. And we don't finish that. I don't think it's not something you can be like, oh, I've got all the truth, and that's the end of it. But I do think there's a revolution in thinking on truth happening now in these kind of internet frontier and,
Yeah.
in philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've been working on this thing. I think you'll be pretty interested in it. Just given your background, and like some of the writing that you've done and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Um, you know how Jordan Peterson, he came out with these like really like psychologically significant renditions of the some classic Disney movies, The Lion King, Pinocchio, stuff like that. Um, a couple years ago, I watched The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and the Disney movie that came out in the 90s, like late 90s. Like late 90s Disney movies are just like awesome.
Totally.
Um, but I noticed a lot of patterns. I was actually reading Pierre Hadot's Philosophy as a Way of Life at that time, and I noticed literally almost frame by frame of the animation how I think that The Hunchback is not a story necessarily of like like a coming of age story or anything like that, um or this like really super deeply archetypal story like the Lion King of like how to remember who you are and take responsibility for that. I think the Hunchback is something to the effect of how to how to become fully formed, and integrated as a person. And if you look at it through the lens of Platonism, and you attach to it the ideological moralism of like a of Christianity. Like so in Christian fundamentalism, like once you get to like kind of Augustine, and then you see Augustine's connection to Martin Luther. Martin Luther is an Augustinian monk, and he's very much concerned with a lot of his own sinful nature and what he can do about that. And then he kind of maybe not maybe haphazardly brings in the notion of free will, a little bit too prematurely and starts to get really mixed up with a lot of that stuff, and um in some ways, can make a big mess of things. um but in the Hunchback, what you see is you see this medieval theologian or theological figure of Judge Frollo, and what he does in the very like prologue is he chases a woman holding a baby, a gypsy woman, which is a woman that doesn't belong in the city of Paris, because the gypsies are sort of tricksters and selling all kinds of vices from things of pleasure and stuff like that. And she goes to the steps of Notre Dame, and then he strips the baby from her and then murders her right in front of the steps there. And so if you interpret the females in that movie being Quasimodo's mother and the character of Esmeralda as wisdom personified, then what you see is that the basic tenet is, if you don't provide wisdom sanctuary in the soul, then it will cause you to be half formed, Quasimodo. And then once you are half formed, there's this overarching uh, idiomoral tyrant over you that will prevent you from actually providing the proper orientation towards wisdom, which is Esmeralda. Because you'll see Quasimodo goes through a series of encounters with her, where at first he's kind of, enamored by her, and like, but and then he falls in love with her. But it's wisdom for the would-be philosopher is not someone that you have, like that you can in an Eros sense kind of like consume, right? You have to be properly oriented to her and provide her proper sanctuary in the soul in order for you to become fully formed and stuff like that. So there's a ton more like that I've been working on, and I'm planning on releasing some videos on. But it's be curious as to what you think of that, especially because you've been as people should know, you've been teaching a course on the Republic recently.
Yes, yeah, I'm doing a course on the Republic for the YouTube channel. I've done a lot of stuff on Jung in the past as well. I was a big reader of Jung, and Pierre Grimes, actually, who somebody mentioned in the chat, describes Jung as a Platonist as well, like that he was essentially that Hermeticism was Middle Platonism, and so Jung is kind of doing a Platonism for psychology, because obviously Plato has this tripartite psyche, which is like that there's multiple centers in the psyche that
Yeah.
are in conflict with each other, and how that conflict plays out is dramatically, as you pointed out, like there is this. And yeah, I mean, for Plato, definitely it's the love of wisdom that's important rather than the possession of wisdom. Like as soon as you think you have wisdom, maybe like Hegel did, and it's like he thought he wasn't even a philosopher anymore because he'd acquired wisdom. He was like, yeah, it's done.
Yeah.
For Plato,
Right.
it's like you're always a lover of wisdom. He was like, to be wise would be like to be a god, essentially. Like it's something that we can aspire to, but that isn't necessarily something we get. And I think DC Schindler actually described it as the philosophical equivalent of grace, which is the
Yes, I remember
pursuit of
him.
these
Yeah.
virtues, and the pursuit of the good that organizes the warring centers of the psyche. In a sense, it's like it's not like the bits of the psyche organize itself. It's like you orient it to the good, and that creates internal, like inner peace, what Plato describes as justice. So there's a weird play there. I know, obviously, with the Calvinism and Luther and stuff, there's a question between faith and works there, and I think
Yes.
there's
Yes.
something kind of similar in Plato as well. He definitely thinks it's, in a sense, that it's grace, but also that we have to participate in a way in it. We can choose to love the lower goods over the higher ones, and end up with the inner conflict. Um, but it's certainly, yeah, it's like the input from the outside, from the good, is what organizes the psyche and creates the inner harmony and the inner peace,
You'll
which is
see
like
in
yeah.
sorry, yeah, I'm just getting excited. You'll see in the movie the three gargoyles, which are named after the original author Victor Hugo. the three gargoyles are actually exact representatives of those three layers of the soul. There's the fat one, which is representing the stomach, is always the one who's encouraging Quasimodo to sort of have that more Epicurean kind of like hedonistic kind of. He's the one who encourages him to go down to the market into Topsy Turvy Day, which is Mardi Gras. And then you have the chest, the larger figure who's the chest. He like the most pronounced aspect of that of the animation is his chest, and he's always sort of kind of cautionary, like maybe you shouldn't do that, and this, that, and the other thing. And then you
Mhm.
have the third gargoyle, who the head is the largest figure in the animation, and that one is sort of kind of like the balancing of the two and trying to regulate, obviously representing reason and stuff like that. And you'll watch the way that the three gargoyles interact
Mhm.
throughout the movie, are analogous to what of Plato's ontology of the architecture of the soul, Jung, and then Freud as well with the id,
Yeah.
ego, and superego. It's I'm telling you, man, the movie is really crazy.
Yeah, and I think I mean that's such a good example of like that universal structure that Plato identifies comes up like throughout every. I mean, in some sense, because it's the basis of the virtues as well. The four cardinal virtues map onto the tripartite psyche. So, like obviously, reason, the functioning, the optimal function of the virtue of that part is wisdom. Thymos, the optimal function is courage. The
Yeah,
appetite, the optimal function is temperance, and then the
yeah,
relationship between them is justice. So it's like, and those four virtues are the cardinal virtues, which the Latin means hinge. So it's like all moral actions hinge on these four virtues essentially. I really think Plato was getting at something biological. Like it's the first theory of the psyche, so it's the first cognitive science anybody ever did. But I think he really hit on something that's like so universal in his, like that's what he's trying to figure out, is universal human nature and then a universal morality from that, which is the cardinal virtues. And obviously in Christianity the cardinal virtues are also in the first of the seven theological virtues. You see it in Dante's Inferno as well. Like the structure of Dante's Inferno um is based on tripartite. He says it's Aristotle's tripartite psyche, but Aristotle only has a bipartite, irrational and irrational as far as I'm aware. But the structure of Dante's Inferno is the intellect, the spirit, and the flesh. And then the sins are divided between that as well. So, like, you'll have the sins of the flesh, like gluttony, lust, greed, the sins of the spirit, envy, wrath, sloth, and then the sins of the intellect, which is pride. And then he splits it up, obviously, into like treachery, betrayal. But Dante's Inferno is structured by that tripartite psyche as well, which is really like, and C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, when he's talking about the universal nature of morality, he uses the same tripartite model. Like he's really hitting on something that's so. I think it's the foundation of morality, essentially. Like a lot of our problems these days are probably because we've rejected that framing, and so we don't have a universal account of human nature to root a universal ethics in. But Plato, that was his mission in the Republic, I think, to identify that, uh, to protect against the sophists and against the natural philosophers, who were the initial philosophers, who were essentially like scientific materialists. Like
right.
they were questioning the gods and divine justice and punishment for in the afterlife. And Plato was like, if that all goes, what grounds morality? What grounds justice? Like, what is it? Why should people behave morally if there's no gods and there's no consequences for it? And so this is why he tracks that to the tripartite psyche, to be like, no, even if it's just your actions, you're going to create this imbalance in your psyche that's going to cause, there's a proper way to do it and a proper way not to do it. And that's the basis really of his kind of rational grounding of morality because of that threat. And like today, I mean, we need exactly that. Like we don't have it anymore.
I remember in
Yeah.
the first video or essay you did on the Republic, as you were starting to release some of that stuff. You came out with like something I had really never considered. That you kind of like really clearly delineated the axial age, and what you called like the meaning crisis of the axial age, where they were kind of going through a similar pattern to what we might be going through now, which I hadn't really made. You kind of just think back to the axial age, and it's like this golden age of human transformation, technological and social and political transformation, and all that stuff. And you don't consider like the troubles or the crisis that may have been afoot at that time period. And when you kind of clearly delineated that back then, it was really insightful, because what it also did was it gave like this um, appropriation, permission for this like kind of character appropriation to now, where we can access um, a little bit more richly what those people may have been going through, and kind of
Yeah.
maybe try to apply it a little bit more succinctly now, and maybe who knows, come up with some kind of a solution. And I think in that regard, another thing that's super relevant to you is how technology will play a role in the success or failure of getting over whatever crisis we're going through now, because you do some work on that as well.
Yeah, tech ethics. That's my main. I mean, social media ethics and the ethics of attention. And I mean, I'm actually using Plato's tripartite psyche at the moment to describe the ethics of attention. Really, that we have these different motivational centers that want, because like really, attention is about relevance. That actually word you use there, and which is like your attention should be given to what's relevant, but sometimes it's caught by what's salient over what's relevant. Salience is how things stand out to us as important. And I mean, the example John gives a lot of the time is like when you're supposed to be on a diet and then you see the chocolate cake, and the chocolate cake is like, oh, this looks
Yeah,
amazing. But you have this other idea of like, no, I need to lose weight and I need to be doing this. And there's a conflict there between the salience and relevance. And a lot of technology, like social media technology, is optimized for salience, for like super normal stimuli, where they're taking advantage of like, notifications are red because we evolved to detect fruit with our eyes, and they've figured that out. And if they can change the colors on UX, it'll make people click 50% more, and this kind of stuff. So there is a kind of arms race there in the technology to take advantage of these things. And I think the solution to that is to educate people on how they work. Like we need to metacognitively understand ourselves now. I mean, Socratic 101, know thyself. As Vervaeke says, it's an owner's manual for being a human being. It's not about your autobiography. And I think the technology has made it that we need that owner's manual now, or else, I mean, who knows how sophisticated the manipulation is with AI and with social media. And like, yeah, I think philosophy has become stunningly relevant, and particularly Plato is like it's kind of
yeah,
everybody laughed at me when I was studying philosophy as an undergraduate. Now
yeah,
it might be the only job left when the AI
yeah,
takes over. So
yeah.
um,
I remember you at the end of your video with one of the videos with DC Schindler. You were going through that with him, and it was funny because you said that you were like trying to justify a becoming a philosopher to your mom, and it's like, mom, this is going to be like the only profession left in at some point. And I found myself laughing so hard because like I've had that a similar sort of thing in my world, where I'm like, I kind of keep it a secret. Like not a lot of people,
oh,
like none of the people
you're an
that I work
undercover
with.
philosopher.
Yeah, well, that was
Sorry.
another thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about.
Uh-huh.
But I remember sending my mom a text, with kind of winking at that comment, because you know, it's it is kind of funny. I mean, like in the AI thing, um,
Mhm.
you know, I'm definitely interested, and you know, uh, I'm definitely interested in trying to make sure that I don't make the same mistake that I made years ago when I was doing doing an undergraduate, where I become kind of disillusioned with philosophy. So like it has to stay visceral for me. Like otherwise, I'm
Yeah.
I'm out. And I find it, in my job, I have a very, very physically strenuous job. I deal with like a lot of uh, vehicle accidents and like large vehicle accidents, like tractor trailers and stuff like that are either overturned, and then we also move a lot of like industrial heavy duty equipment. um so they're like, I'm a certified crane operator, so I have to not only, do lifting operations that are kind of, controlled, a controlled load, but I have to do a lot of corrective uh, recoveries of different, accidents, big accidents that happen.
Mhm.
And recently, I mean, the job is great because it is a very visceral job. Like, what it feels like to go out at 2 o'clock in the morning in the middle of a snowstorm and, drag hundreds of pounds of chain and wire rope, down an embankment to try and upright something. So there's this physicality to it. Um, and that, to me, that feels so embodied, and having the affordance of something like a Platonic philosophy to uh help me understand and help my body and my meaning making machinery, like, understand what I'm really doing. I'll like say to myself, like, I'll tell my fiance all the time, like, I'll show her a picture of one of the trucks that I drive, and it's like, I'm taming dragons. I'm taming dragons out here, because I mean, like, when you look at the anatomy of the truck, it's like it's got this huge long snout with antlers, and then it's got this boom on the back that looks like a tail, and you're trying to you're optimizing to try and utilize this huge monster of a machine in order to maneuver the world and put the world right in a lot of different ways. And there's just so many constraints on what can go wrong, if the competence level isn't, and the attention is not where it needs to be at the
That's what I
right
was
time.
thinking. Yeah, attention is seems essential in that, man.
And
And
so
it
what
really,
I've done
yeah.
recently, a couple weeks ago, I had purchased a drone, and so I've been using this drone to aid me in a lot of these recoveries and a lot of these different scenarios where, and it's been a complete game changer, like, for me at a cognitive level, because what I'm able to do and like the things I'm able to consider um and kind of uh pay attention to now is totally changed. So like the safety of the job goes up, because I can
Mhm.
see more. The efficiency goes up quite a bit, and the best part is the meaning of it goes up, into another level. So like, I'll have a situation where there's, some kind of casualty down. I'll get the wrecker kind of set up where I need it to be, and then I'll shoot the drone up, and then I can have the screen right here, and the wreckers you can control, like, physically on the wrecker, like, you have your hands on the levers and stuff, or you can operate it remotely, and there's a big difference between those two. But having the drone there and being able to operate it remotely, like, you can watch this whole thing happen, and put your body in this very, very meaningful and uh adrenaline producing situation.
Sounds like you can get another perspective on it as well, and a kind of top-down perspective. Because I
Yes.
really think that's Plato's like solution to relativism, is that he's like we're all stuck in our little perspectives, like our own world, but through dialogues and through taking on other people's perspectives and through getting a higher perspective, we can get to the best perspective. And the best perspective really for him is like this overview of like being able to see all of the bits essentially, and that's like how we get to truth pretty much. That's for Plato, because like for the sophists, like there is no truth, there's no way out of our individual world. So as DC Schindler points out, it's all manipulation, it's all competition, it's all like, you know, if there's no truth outside of me and you, one of us is going to win and the other one's going to lose, and then that's, you know, that's the whole world essentially, is this war of all against all. So like getting to that higher perspective in a way is like the way out of that Plato
Mm.
suggests. And I guess you're doing a physical way of actually getting to like other, and it sounds like high intensity as well, like that you need, you know, you're a lot's on the line there. I don't know, do you read much Stoicism? It's kind of reminding me of Epictetus and like his work on attention, of like, he says like it's easier, he talks about a mariner and is like, if it's easier to for a lapse of attention to crash the ship than it is to keep it on course. Like you have to have complete 100% attention, or else even a momentary lapse and you're going to run out into the rocks pretty much. So the Stoics think we should live our whole lives like that. We should have this constant vigilance of our impressions, our judgments, our thoughts,
Mm.
and always question them, always, and not in a way that's just like this anxious thing, but like just to be almost like a warrior of the truth, like a martial arts mindset of like, I'm gonna focus on all of this meditatively. I'm gonna make sure there's nothing seeping into my mind that shouldn't be there. Essentially, he describes it as like a night watchman. It's almost like a bouncer for your brain, or a night, like be stopping impressions and being like, you know, who are you? What are you doing here? What's you know, what's your business inside my head, in my own thoughts? And yeah, developing this like real powerful like sense of truth, um that yeah comes from that vigilance and discipline. And so like you're doing that for real in a sense, but like I do think that's real philosophy. Like that's what philosophy should be.
Yeah.
It's not just like
Yes.
writing essays. And so it's something you should be doing every single day, like the spiritual exercises, the way you approach problems or people. It's so, that aspect of philosophy is just so much more powerful, man, than the other stuff. I really, it sucks that what they teach in university isn't that a lot of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Because it's so useful as well for people. I think during
Yeah.
COVID, like the explosion of stoicism and stuff, people found that like it could really help them to have peace of mind, um, in ways that people didn't even know existed. Like people turned to it as a alternative.
Yeah,
Um,
I haven't really heard that that particular aspect of stoicism, in
mhm.
terms of the like the guardianship of your own attention, uh your attention span, like the bandwidth of your attention, the information flow of your attention, and actually kind of um
Mm,
developing that guardianship, like that second tier, um uh um, you know, uh, person that's guarding that. That's really interesting. So are you kind of like using that notion or aspect of stoicism to influence um your study on AI or in social media and stuff like that?
yeah, I would. I mean, it doesn't, not much works with social media, unfortunately, but a lot of it, yeah, because like it is designed to manipulate. Like the Stoics would have used the example of like sophists, and like you could have a crowd of people applauding you for doing something terrible. And if you just think, oh, people are applauding me, then this is great, versus thinking, is this actually a right or wrong action? What does it mean
Uh,
for an action to be right or wrong? Like how to inhibit, like turn down the relevance on the social feedback and instead focus on like, is this the right or wrong thing? Like Socrates really in his trial, where he's like, you know, the people are going, oh, he's terrible, he's this. Also like Jesus, in that sense of like the social feedback is like they're going to kill him, but he's the
yeah.
most just person, in a sense of being able to overcome that social pressure, which is an example of one pressure. I mean, there's a lot of other pressures that could be possible. I mean, but for the Stoic attitude, I think it's being aware of those forces that are acting upon your attention, um actively, and like as you pointed out, like paying attention to your own attention. Are you using it
Yeah.
properly? Are you giving attention to the things that matter when they matter, or is your attention just being stolen? And that social media obviously is designed to steal your attention. That's like the whole business model pretty much. So your attention is definitely more, but I do think that's peace of mind can come from that discipline of attention. Like if you think about monks and stuff, people are always like, you know, oh, live in the moment. And it's like monks are like the most disciplined people of like every second of their day is regimented. They're praying, they're focusing, like they're monitoring their mind and what comes into it and what they do with it. And it's like that's really how you get peace of mind. It's not just like letting everything run and just going like, oh yeah, see, it'll
Yeah,
be great.
and I
It's a
don't want that.
discipline.
Yeah,
Mm.
I don't want that to be mistaken too, because there's this other aspect of stoicism, which is like the conformity to what's happening in front of you or to nature. And so it seems
Mm.
like that conversation between the the inner discipline and taking responsibility and the an effort to train your own attention, um, but like you're saying, you'll have somebody who's as disciplined as a monk, like kind of pre-planning a regiment and things like that. But there's this other aspect of stoicism which is completely complementary to all of that inner work, which is also when the circumstances allow you to, or when the circumstances constrain you to not being able to, go and have your prayer time or do this or that other thing. How malleable are you? How robust is that discipline to be able to maneuver itself to be able to deal with this new set of strengths that has,
Yeah.
come up against you?
Totally, and to be not like so overly regimented in a sense that that you're inflexible or that you can't, like one problem comes along and you fall apart. I mean, I think it was Warren Farrell said in the Boy Crisis that like everything requires discipline, even discipline in a sense. Like your discipline needs discipline. Like you can't
Yeah,
just rely on that and be like, oh yeah, this is my all. But I think that's the Stoics. They're different kinds of discipline, but it's like disciplining what you will say is true, disciplining what you'll have an affective reaction to, in a sense of
yeah,
like, are you going to
yeah,
let this like get to you in that way? And also disciplining what you identify with is a big part of it. Like, do you identify with maybe a role or an identity or something that's like counterproductive? When I was younger, I really identified with the role of being like a party guy, like showing up in college, like, woo, let's party. But then you end up drinking too much and you get a hangover. And like me identifying with that role created certain constraints on my behavior that was actually self destructive. And so sometimes we put ourselves into these roles that are actually, going to have bad consequences for us. So the Stoics would recommend paying attention to that and being like, is this actually a good role? Is this what I should be doing? Socrates, I mean, Stoicism is like trying to internalize Socrates, really.
right.
That's what John describes it, the religion of internalizing Socrates, or
Yeah.
the philosophy of, yeah, turning them into
So
technologies.
one of the main differences I see between like a lot of the notions that you're kind of putting forth here, with regard to a philosophical way of life, versus uh, this idiomoral beginning that I think a lot of fundamentalist Christianity is introducing to people,
Mhm.
or at least that some people that I know are growing up in, is this difference here. It seems like, and I remember this, wrestling with this upon first encounter with Platonic dialogues, was that it felt like I was introduced to the notion of doing something for its own sake, um, uh, and not treating it as a mere means to an end. And when that stays as a, like, kind of like this super low entry level sort of, almost prerequisite, uh, when you're dealing with Platonic thought. It's like there right at the outset, like, I mean, it's in some ways it's kind of the question of the Euthyphro dilemma, like, yeah, do the gods love piety because it's pious, or is it pious because the gods love it? It's like the first introduction to Platonic thought is, can you wrestle with the motivations that are propelling you? Are you a slave to them? Do you have the ability to actually kind of take them off and look at them? And I think that for a lot of Christians, I don't think they're introduced to that very early on. I don't think they're really allowed to or afford the opportunity to wrestle with that notion. And importantly as well, like if, after you read the youth row, it's kind of there's no answer. There's no answer. Like the whole point is to kind of have to wrestle with this and uh deal with it. But for a lot of Christians, I think that they get endowed with this notion of the law, that of morality as
Mm,
being either this thing that you are doing because of consequences. And then the unfortunate part is that that narrative runs that structure runs through almost the entirety of the Christian narrative, or the Bible, where it's you're not doing something for its own sake. You're doing it because of heaven or hell, or because of sin and righteousness, or something like that. And you can't get out of this, this constant manipulation of yourself and other people and objects in the world or circumstances in the world, where you have to treat everything, you're almost caused to treat everything as a means um to to please God or something like that. And it doesn't have that phraseology doesn't have the ability to afford you the opportunity to participate with something like, are you doing this for the good, for its own sake, or are you just doing this as a means to an end? And that little fundamental little switch from like that childhood kind of like, I'm not going to steal the cookie from the cookie jar because my mom's going to, you know there's going to
mm.
be consequences, to that switch into, oh, now I'm starting to do things for their own sake. Like, so why am I going to, you know uh have a YouTube conversation with Mahon, because it's fun for its own sake, and that starts to bleed out, in my estimation.
Man, there's so many interesting things there in what you brought up, and that's such an interesting because I've seen that a lot in Christian friends that I have that I suppose that were educated Catholic in the case of in Ireland. That was a very kind of like I don't know deontological or like really restrictive. It was quite like these are the rules, you have to follow the rules. If you break the rules, you're going to hell, and that's why you're doing it in some sense. Versus I think in ancient Christianity as well, in a sense, it's like no, this is the structure of reality. Like if you behave in this way, you're going to end up in a bad way. It's like you're going to have, the original meaning of sin, hamartia, like is an archery term. You're going to be off the mark in a sense. It's like it's more like it's for your own benefit. In Plato's language, it's consequentially good, but it's also intrinsically good. Like he
Right.
describes justice as it's consequentially good in that it leads to peace of mind and inner harmony, but it's also intrinsically good because it's just a good thing to have. Like it's good, like health is good. Like health has good consequences, but health is good in and of itself as well.
Yeah.
Like we do have those two kind of goods. And yeah, I think ethically, in terms of moral behavior, you don't want to be too, I don't know. I look at it as more like a martial arts, more like a sports kind of attitude in a sense of like, if I'm just beating myself over the head all the time, it's not actually very useful for me. Like I should be making progress and getting better and like learning and developing. But like if it's too restrictive, it's almost like counterproductive. You're just self-flagellating yourself and maybe not doing, not actually improving in a way. Like I don't know, that kind of, it sounds very harsh, that like law and discipline. Don't have that much experience with that type of Christianity myself, but I've definitely seen it. Particularly in friends and stuff that have turned away from it, they seem to have been very badly affected by it, which is a shame
Yeah.
because it's a religion of love, I think, ultimately.
Yeah.
Um,
So I mean, it just happens to be sort of kind of, you know within the landscape of this channel a little bit, so I mean, it's called Beyond the Fundamentals, and that's kind of that's kind of oriented towards beyond the fundamentals of this Christianity that a lot of people in this circle have grown up in, and so it's definitely something I have noticed. But I would say, for in my own experience, you brought up the whole kind of athletic side of things. One of the other things that I like in Plato's rendition of how to, you know, persuade a soul towards the good is the
Hmm.
training of the guardians, and how they're kind of put on this program where they have to learn these basic things. You'll be able to tell me, but I think, if I remember correctly, some of the first things that they're to learn or participate with is music and gymnastics. You know,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and I mean, music and gymnastics, that's kind of like the art and physical exercise in a sense, because it includes a lot more in music than just actually music. But the music idea is like a musical way of living. It's like the
hmm
arts make you harmonious in this
yeah,
sense.
harmonious, how to
And then
synchronize into a group, and
yep,
like, because music is really great, a great
coordination.
analogy. Yeah, because of
Yeah.
the layering of it, right?
Yep.
So, you can learn how to, I when I went to school, I had a roommate who went to Berkeley School of Music, which is like a really, really well-renowned music school. And I remember him telling me that there were certain musicians who had this like theory, where if you wanted to teach somebody how to play music, you don't use, and this is like a musical purist kind of person, where what you do is you just give them an instrument, and then you put them in a jazz group or in a musical group perpetually. And eventually, at some point, they will start to play. And, of course, that's a radical theory, but the principle is taken nonetheless, where, in order to really learn how to do something, well, you have to like participate in it. And music is such a great thing because, like I said, all of those layers that are there gives you so many points of entry. Like, you could get your first meaningful connection to a musical situation or musical moment because you heard something come into to key, like, for the first time, or you saw the layering of like one harmony above another and then under another, and like you start to develop not just a connection to music itself, but you also start to develop other things like the ability to move into an imaginal space or something like that, you know
Totally.
speaking of that, in our group session 2 weeks ago, we've been trying different practices, and developing some different practices ourselves. One of the ones that we tried was, and it was really funny because you actually released a video on the Timaeus, like literally a day or so afterward. But
Hmm.
I remember, when I first started reading the Platonic dialogues, that it felt to me like Plato was trying to get the reader to visualize, in an imaginal way, the form or the object at hand, which would be like, the virtue of courage, or knowledge as such, or virtue as such, or what have you.
Hmm.
And what I remember him doing a lot of the time was using like geometric shapes to, uh sometimes, like, to try and maybe prove something. But what I usually got out of it, not being super mathematically minded, or what, uh, a good mathematician at all, but I got a lot of enjoyment out of trying to follow the the shape at hand. So like when Timaeus is describing the geometric shapes of the rudiments of the universe, air, fire, wind, air, fire, water, and earth, right? There's like pages of this imaginal movement of, you know, at the hypotenuse there's a square, and then the square, if it's turned this way, is like, so it's kind of like training you to think imaginally in this way. And what we had done as a practice was have everybody, instead of, like meditating or doing something like that, because I mean, personally for me, I don't ever break out time to like sit down and meditate deliberately. But well, like what I will do is um go, bring my mind through exercises like this, and it's not like deliberately an exercise to me. It's more something that I sort of just do extemporaneously or spontaneously. And we had the group close their eyes and try and follow the argument or the lines that Timaeus was trying to make with these forms and figures, and we'll try it again at some point. But do you tend to do stuff like that at all?
I do. I mean, I do a lot of different kind of spiritual exercise. I have a Dialogos practice that we've been doing for since 2021, really. So we did John Vervaeke's original Dialogos course. And so we do Dialogos dialogues, which is kind of like where you're dialoguing around a virtue, like in a Platonic dialogue, and you're trying to dramatize that virtue in a sense as you're doing it. So like if you're
Yep.
talking about courage, at some point you'll try and feel what is courage in this dialogue, you know what I mean? You'll try and recognize it and then like presence it for the group. And we add meditation into that. We do a bit of circling, some vertical alignment, different kinds of contemplative practices. I mean, I pray every day. These kind of non-propositional activities are so important, I think, to spiritual development. And I suppose figuring out what your ecology of practices, which is John's language, is going to be, in a sense. Like, you don't have to do all of the imaginal exercises. Now some people struggle with like visual imagery, and so something like trying to
Right.
picture that might be really difficult and just like not that productive, whereas a different kind of contemplative exercise might work better. But um yeah, I would do some of that. And then active imagination, Carl Jung did a lot of that for creativity and for writing. I mean, because I write a lot of stories and stuff, so you're visualizing the story and the characters and how things are going, and you're plugged into that imaginal space in a way that's, yeah, pretty nourishing, I think, if you never plug into it. Um, but yeah, that would be the only kinds of those exercises really that I would do.
Yeah, because it just seems to me that, like, I don't really remember a time in my, adolescent to adult life where I wasn't kind of instinctively doing things of this sort. And I do, for anybody that is around me that will have would read a Platonic dialogue or something like that, I try to encourage a lot of the fundamentalist Christians that I know to engage with Platonic dialogues, because of the richness of what they'll cause you to do, or at least what they caused me to do. And it wasn't just,
Mhm.
again, like this intellectual thing. It may be at the surface, but it commands, I think, like when with how like pedantic or like meticulous the characters are. Like when you really think about it, it's like there's pages and pages and pages of these people trying to define something, and really 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 hunker down on exactly what they're trying to drive at. And it takes uh it takes time to for a lot of people, I would imagine it takes time to sort of develop the attention span and the the bandwidth of cognitive capacity to follow an argument. I mean, even to this day, like I can't sit down and just, you know, read some of the dialogues, you know,
Yeah.
without reading one or two pages and being like, okay, like,
This
you
is
know,
this is difficult, and so
it's
some are
hard.
better than others as well. I think. I mean, the Republic has an interesting balance of that. Like, 'cause I was teaching on the undergrad course last year in Dublin City University, and I was doing the Republic with them, and all these kids are like 20, 19, and I'm trying to get them to read this like book that's 2,500 years old and
Yeah.
like has all this weird stuff in it. And you're trying to be like, well, I know this is weird, but like there's really good stuff, and you could see like some things land with them, other stuff is kind of like they're not getting it. So like, I think if you have the discipline to show up and to get through it, it kind of plants seeds and it comes up later
Yes.
and it does weird things to you in a way.
Yeah. It's just weird
But
things
like
to you.
it does weird things where it's like you would have never thought of things in that way, or even being able to reason. It has an effect on that, but it is hard. Like they're not pleasurable reads. Like they're not gonna be. You know what I mean? Like the
Yeah.
dialogues. Because originally they were like, are they like plays? But like if you put one of them on stage, man, everybody would
Yeah.
fall asliep. Like it would be the most
Yeah.
boring thing
Yeah, I've
of
always
all
thought that. I'm
time.
like, why
Yeah.
can't I just go on YouTube and watch people, you know, like
Yeah.
enacting Platonic dialogues, and it's like, or just go
That'd be
down to the
cool
local
somewhere.
theater, you know? I think it would be
Yeah.
awesome. It would be. I wish
Christopher
somebody would
Master
do that.
Pietro, actually, who part of his work, I've had a few dialogues with Chris, hung out with him. He does, they do dramatic readings of Platonic dialogues. So that he'll get people to read the dialogues to each other and they'll play the characters, and somebody plays Socrates and somebody plays the interlocutor, in order to kind of provoke insights, which is very interesting in actually like performing the dialogues rather than just reading them, which is,
Yeah.
I mean, pretty cool.
So where is that? Where is that going on?
I don't know. I think he does it with the Awaken to Meaning site, which is
Okay.
John's one. That's where he has all his practices that they do. So they do meditation, they'll do journaling, they do some circling stuff, and then they have the different courses as well on that. That's where initially I did the Dialogos course, was with
Yep.
John's with the Awaken to Meaning. um, which are very cool, man. And yeah, I think he's talked about it on YouTube before as well, probably. But even just trying to get into the dialogues, trying to read them, and looking at secondary materials is really good. Like Michael Sugra's lectures on Plato on YouTube,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
good, man. They're
Yeah. Yeah.
awesome.
He's
Like
so great.
really great. Stuff with DC Schindler. John has some great lectures on it. Having people to get you into it and then you can read them, I think is good motivationally as well. 'Cause sometimes if you just jump straight in, you're like kind of like, what the hell is this? Like this is
Right.
kind of super
Yeah.
complicated. Like
Chris and John are doing some thing on Moby Dick, right? And
mhm,
they released a video, and Chris said something to the effect of like, John wants everybody to, like read the book before the course so you're familiar with this. And Chris is like, I remember when I was in school, like, I kind of like didn't read the books, He's like, but I did notice that if I had a professor or I had, somebody who kind of hyped it up beforehand, then I
yeah,
read it, and like, because I wanted, like, it had this enchantment to it, and I kind of wish that I had that too, early on. I mean, I think anything that I kind of take interest in now is because it came to me through something like this. um but yeah, doing a Platonic dialogue, enacting one would be totally something I would love doing. I would never get sick of that. Like,
yeah,
like I get so people that are around me get so frustrated a lot of the time because and maybe it is just because I have read through them, and I enjoy it now. It's not it
mhm,
kind of is like going to the gym. You know what I'm saying? I can
yeah,
imagine where at first, you're going and you're lifting that weight and it's just miserable stuff, but once your body is trained in the true sense, then it gets this um this ability to, you know understand what kind of a load it can handle in order to get it into that that place where it's meaningful, where it's productive. I think the notion of a flow state is kind of what you're looking for there, and
Yes.
um,
And there's
I
gold, man. I'm hoping to start some reading groups at some point on my Wisdom Dojo Substack, to be honest, to do the Iamblican curriculum. So, I mean, if you want to read the Platonic dialogues the way the ancients did it, Iamblichus, who's a Neoplatonic philosopher, set up a curriculum starting with the Alcibiades, finishing with Timaeus, like an
okay,
order to read all the dialogues in that they would have done to teach people Plato, essentially. So they like prioritized the dialogues they thought were the most important.
okay,
I'd love to start a group of people just like reading, like just show, because I think things like that as well, like reading groups. No, I know another guy that started. What was his name? Arval. See my Arval. He on YouTube. He does a lot of Christian Platonism stuff, but he has a bunch of reading groups, and basically you meet up and you read Plato with other people. You'll talk about it. You discuss it because a group as well is a great way, like a gym, to motivate you to do it, and also then to get insights from other people and communicate your own ones. Like the dialogues are dialectical; they're meant to be done with,
yeah,
other people as well. So that might be another way into it, for people to start reading groups or join reading groups, particularly online. I mean, I'm sure there's tons.
yeah. I would like I would like to dive more into that stuff too, because like I said, I do get enjoyment out of, like, I mean, I'll do it almost every night, when I get a chance, is just pick up, basically just kind of pick up a Platonic cognitive load, you know, participate with the dialogue there, and like, and it's funny again, like you say, what it will do to you. Like, I remember, being in school, like, I, as a kid, like, I failed classes. I was, not by any stretch of the imagination. Like, when I took standardized testing, I would always score, like, kind of just below average, in comparison to other students and stuff like that. I would have never thought in that time that by the time I got to be an adult that I would, um, number one, even be able to comprehend anything that was going on in something like philosophy, never mind actually, like, really enjoy it, and in some ways, um, you know, desire um, to consume it and let it metabolize. I think, I mean, I've got to say it. I mean, I've spent years at this point studying the Bible. Like, I know the Bible pretty well. And I just have to say, the Bible has its function for me for sure. But I don't know why this is. When I read a Platonic dialogue, it has this a much more potent, transformative um, capacity, and that's just for me. When I come out of the Bible, um, it just hasn't had the same. It hasn't had the same affordances, for me personally, and that's not a dig, because it has its its place for me for sure. But I've just been trying to encourage more people to engage with these dialogues and just kind of like see what happens.
Yeah, I think you can do both as well. I mean, John says that, yeah, if you like Western civilization, if you put it on 2 feet, one would be the Bible and the other would
Yeah.
be Plato's Republic or the complete works of Plato. Like it would be, they really work well together. I mean, I think the reality, there is obviously differences. I mean, Plato's very elitist in a sense. The Greeks are always very elitist. Like they don't have the everybody's made in the image of God thing. They're quite
Right.
like hierarchical in that sense of although Plato I think is getting there, like he's getting towards agapic love and but it is just earlier, it's 400 BC or whatever, so it's um but in a sense for me anyway, like understanding Platonism helped me get into Christianity in a way that was like really profound and intellectually like just got rid of all my critical voice in my mind, which was always a barrier for me with Christianity. I was really opposed to it in a way that it was like, this isn't true, it's not real, this is all, made up nonsense or whatever. And then when I understood Platonic metaphysics and I realized that, what was it Nietzsche said, like Christianity is Platonism for the masses, I was like, that's actually a great thing because Platonism is unreal. So I was like, I saw the connection between them, and that really helped me to intellectually, like, it's almost like watching a play or something, like the suspension of disbelief. So you can actually participate in it. Like if you have that questioning gap in your mind of like, is this good? Is this, you're worried about it. You can't really participate fully in the mass and the rituals and the practices, and for me, intellectually understanding Platonism and understanding Christianity allowed me to do that. Like it got me over those intellectual hurdles. And I had a lot of intellectual hurdles as a radical atheist. So, I think for Christians, there's a lot of benefit there. Oh, just lost Nick. Seems to have disappeared.
I've been lurking in the background here in the studio, Mahon. It's good to meet you.
Good to meet you.
We haven't spoken yet.
Yeah.
Nick has really headed this up, and I was just going to sit quietly until he disappeared. I'm not sure why he disappeared.
Possibly some internet troubles, maybe.
Yeah, he's out there in Connecticut. You never know what happens. I noticed that what you're talking about seems a lot to do with it's all practices, like read the books or do these practices, do these readings, do these things. But if you look at the way churches are structured today, it's all about like the ontological framing and what you're supposed to believe, less so than anything participatory. And I don't know if you ever thought about that, or if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think it would probably
how
depend on the
that is,
church, wouldn't it? Where I go, I mean, there's an element of call and response, of reading the gospel, of prayer and movement and song, and I suppose they're all kind of embodied attentional practices. Like you're taking different perspectives on yourself, you're taking different, you're speaking to God, you're asking for forgiveness. There's a whole it's definitely a different imaginal space than I would be outside of church, in a sense.
right.
And I wouldn't have been able to do that as an atheist. Obviously, when I was younger, I couldn't even walk past a church really without having a very critical mindset about it. But I think there's probably levels within Christianity. I don't know. I don't know. Like I've never been to a Protestant mass or how any of that would work. If that has the same kind of practices as
So I think
Catholicism. But,
yeah, I may be going way off course here, but if I look at probably what was salvageable about Catholicism before the Protestant Reformation was a lot of the interactive practices and the participation that happened. And I almost feel that the Protestant Reformation brought more maybe corruption isn't the right word, but more stultification than it's almost like it added some more wrongs rather than taking it back to right, if that makes sense. So on the non-Catholic side, a lot of us don't really call ourselves Protestants, but it's from a fundamentalist standpoint, it's really all about what you affirm to be true, but nobody's really transforming and becoming anything that is better than anything they were yesterday. And that's something that bothers me. Like what I'm trying to do with this channel is like, let's get involved in practices that actually make you transform and grow into something that you haven't been. And I feel like that's missing big time. And the conversation I've heard you and Nick having has been about practices, dialoguing, which I think would be a better place for people who are spiritually minded to get to as far as what we do.
Totally. I think it's about a transformation. Like I think that transformation has to take place. And if it's just about propositions and like asserting particular beliefs, I mean, I know people are atheists and they're like, oh, I just don't accept that belief system or something like that.
Right.
And I don't even really think about it as a belief system, to be honest. I mean, there are I suppose certain beliefs in it, but it's also a set of practices and technologies to transform your character to have these insights into what's real, which is only possible by doing it. In a sense, it's like that
doing it.
gym analogy, like you can think about going to the gym and go, oh yeah, I'll get ripped if I go to the gym and this will happen and that'll happen. But then you actually go to the gym and it's very different. It doesn't work that way. You have to learn things. There's all these skills, there's ways of doing it. And then you're a different person on the other side. So like, if you're not doing that, in a sense,
Well, yeah. Well, fundamentalism is kind of like somebody going to the gym all day, every day, and taking measurements on the weights and on the weight bench, and then feeding those back, and then forming in groups based on who agrees on those measurements. But nobody's lifting any weights.
Nobody's lifting any weights. Yeah, that sounds unproductive to say the least. Yeah,
to say the least. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, I kind of butted in because we lost you, Nick. But
No, I can't believe that's so awesome. I was like kind of freaking out because I just lost internet for a second there, and then I was pleasantly surprised to see that you just were right there to catch it.
I didn't want to leave him here by himself.
I was gonna start taking questions from the audience, but I was gonna.
Yeah. I'm gonna let you two get back at it. But thanks for coming on while I'm here. It's a pleasure to have both of you. I'm gonna back out and let you continue your conversation.
Mahon, I don't know how much time you got left. I was gonna start wrapping up, and
yeah, totally. A few minutes. Yeah, if you want to finish up, if there's anything you're thinking about. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been super cool, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'll be sure to make sure that just pay attention to what's going on over there. If I'm watching the Wisdom Dojo and reading the stuff that you're putting out, and really appreciate the work you're doing, and I'm really, really grateful that you came on, and I hope maybe as I'm gonna try and work through some of the stuff I've been working with, like especially with the hunchback thing. I think I think it's kind of helpful to maybe use that kind of an animated sort of movie in order to introduce people to these things, because it has this kind of playful element to it where it's kind of inviting because it's cartoony and all that stuff. But as I'm watching that movie at this point, there's all of these things that there's sort of this cascade of insights that are helpful to me, and I'd like to see if it's helpful to other people, so
totally. And and it's deep stuff, like and in terms of the Wisdom Dojo, I have a podcast coming out next week with DC Schindler, a third one, so I'll send that on to you, man. I'm sure I think it's one of the best conversations I've ever had in my podcast, for sure.
Yeah.
Like,
okay.
he is astounding. It's on Platonism, so yeah, you might be interested.
So have you been reading DC Schindler has kind of brought me into Eric Pearl and stuff like that, right? So now I've been starting to consume a lot more Neoplatonism, and I do you see yourself going in that kind of a direction as well?
Yeah, I would have read Plotinus. I haven't read a huge amount of the secondary, like Proclus or Iamblichus. So my reading of Neoplatonism is pretty cursory, to be honest. But yeah, totally. I mean, I'm big into Christian Neoplatonism and really Christian Platonism. So I'm reading the Church Fathers and a lot of those guys at the moment, particularly Saint Gregory of Nyssa, who fuses a lot of that together as well. His book On the Making of Man, The Image of Man, is kind of a rewriting of Plato's Timaeus as a Christian version of it.
Okay.
So yeah, I'm definitely in that kind of early 1st, 2nd century Christianity / Platonism mode at the moment.
Okay. I'll be sure to stay in contact with you about this, because I'm suspicious about this. I came years ago. I came across this philosopher, Forrest Landry.
Yeah.
Okay, so have you looked into his imminent domain metaphysics at all?
No, I don't. I've no of Forrest. I've never met him or anything. I've seen a couple of his conversations, really, but no, I wouldn't be familiar with it.
Okay. Well, so on this channel, we've been kind of taking a very, very haphazard, and I'll just say shamelessly. We've been trying to dive into his imminent domain metaphysics, and a lot of the channel's participants and viewers have been getting a lot from it. And basically, what it is, and again, I'll just say this shamelessly, um, is it seems like he's trying to make a metaphysics that's grounding all of reality into this movement, which is which is the notion of a bonded triad. And so he's saying that um, there's basically three modalities to any domain, and those three modalities are going to be characterized and denotated as the omniscient modality, the transcendent modality, and the immanent modality. And so any sort of notion that you can understand, I mean, even being itself will be a domain, and being itself as a domain will have these three modalities participating in some way. And so it's definitely the type of metaphysics which is sort of Platonic in a sense, where the only way to really, really, really understand it is to actually participate in it, and in a lot of the times in a dialogical way participate with the notions that he's getting at. So you won't understand what he means by the omniscient, transcendent, or immanent if you don't play around with different domains. Um, my suspicion is, well, let me just give you a quick example of one. Like one of the domains that I got early on that allowed me access into understanding more of the domains was um, um, the bonded triad of simplicity, complexity, and clarity. And so, what in that domain, this is kind of in a domain of, I guess you would call like systems analysis or something like that.
Hmm.
When you're analyzing some kind of a system, uh, you'll have people making, having a perspective or making claims on the simplicity of that system. You'll have a view that is, part of the complexity of it. But what this metaphysics is really good for is like breaking you out of a Cartesian dualism, or a binary way of understanding all these things, because he'll introduce a third into the domain, and in this case the third is clarity. And so what then when you look at those three, you just kind of you try to understand which modality each notion is holding. So in this particular domain, the um the simplicity would probably hold the omniscient domain. Think of it as like kind of like the whole encompassing, the wanting of it. The
Hmm.
complexity would hold the transcendent domain. Um, where you're if you're going to make the system more complex, what you're going to be doing is kind of moving in some way, like zooming in or zooming out, like in a transitioning sort of way, making it the transcendent modality. And then the clarity is the immanent domain, because the immanent domain is always the 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 domain that is, basically kind of affording the other two, right? So when you're talking about systems analysis or something like that, the notion of clarity will be contrasted. I'm sorry, the notion of simplicity will be contrasted with the notion of complexity based on the level of clarity, right? So that's kind of just like one instance of how he's thinking through these things. And he has a lot of different domains that are like, already kind of prefigured in a way. He has like doing, being, becoming. He has there's a whole list of them. But
Yeah,
basically
I'm really not familiar with it. I'll have to read or have a look at some of it. Like, yeah, I haven't heard
I'll
anything
send
on
you
this.
I'll send you a copy of it in
Okay.
PDF form, because it's kind of hard to get a hold of. Like, like there's no book. It's just like he has it posted online, which is kind of strange. But my suspicion is this. The way in which he's understanding his imminent domain metaphysics is, and maybe this is just because I'm spending my time reading these things, but it seems very, 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 very Neoplatonic, with
Mm.
the the movements that I think he's making. We said earlier on today about the how Plato seems to kind of be, touching the ground of things when he kind of comes up with this tripartite nature of not just the soul, but of like the city. And then, it's like this tripartite
Mhm.
model is so is so useful. What he would say probably is imminent at all these fractal levels, you know. So with that, I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
If you
I'll check it out.
see if it's interesting. It's been quite a ride for us. So
Sounds good, man. Yeah, totally. And if people are interested in checking out the Wisdom Dojo and that stuff, maybe if you want to include the link, or you can just go to
yeah,
mahonmccann.com.
yeah,
That'll
I'll
go to
do
the
that.
Substack or Mahon
I'll
McCann
uh,
on
I'll
YouTube.
I'll put the link in the description for people. I would encourage people to check out Mahon's channel and check out the Wisdom Dojo, because I think you do a great job of giving people a really succinct and coherent understanding of Plato, and in such a way that I definitely would have appreciated upon first encounter with Plato. It's really it's very enchanted. But it's also rigorous, and you're gonna sweat, So yeah, I'll hook all that stuff up, and we'll catch up hopefully soon.
Really appreciate it. Thanks again, Nick.
All right, man. I'll see you.